As far as I'm concerned, as long as that same respect and recognition is not shown toward every one of our people in this country, it doesn't exist for me. And during the few moments that we have left, we want to have just an off-the-cuff chat between you and me. Us. We want to talk right down to earth in a language that everybody here can easily understand.
It's quite interesting if I were to speak about my own intellectual journey. And I've actually got to thank my guest today, who's also a friend, Sham from Birmingham, bitter Arab on social media, on Twitter particularly, always burning fire on people. And I have to actually thank her because she introduced me to so many different topics and ways of thinking, particularly when we think about Black liberation. So, wagwan Sham, and welcome to the Malcolm
Hi there.
Effect.
I'm happy to finally be here. Had to force myself in.
Don't try. You were always gonna come. You were one of the first people I asked when I was actually in Birmingham. Don't try it. But now,
Dave, I'm joking.
now for the longest, you had in your Twitter name, yeah. Sham says, "Read Pedagogy of the Oppressed." Why?
Mm-hmm. I think particularly like one of my favorite things about pedagogy, because I've read it about 4 or 5 times now. I think very importantly, like it's like a classic work that seeks to morph education into a beautiful, transformative social force, right? And unfortunately, it's often omitted from Western teacher preparatory programs because of its liberating pedagogy. And the fact that it inherently undermines the constructed power narratives that we have that constantly buttresses the elite's global hegemony in the consciousness of oppressed people. And what Freire does is his purpose is to basically reveal how education is currently used as a mechanism even of the oppressor to mold our consciousness and mold the consciousness of the oppressed in particular into this kind of static reality of inequality, right? And as a result, what he does is he instead advocates for an educational paradigm that not only unveils reality as a limiting process, but he also says that it must be collaboratively transformed if both the elites and the masses are to regain our humanity, right? And he argues that the pedagogy of the oppressed is an instrument for that discovery for both the oppressed and the oppressors, and its manifestations of the same dehumanizing realities of capitalism, which are perpetrated in the banking model, quote unquote, that he talks about.
Yeah, the kind of vertical way of teaching. Just to kind of comment on that, I think you're spitting facts. I think whilst I was reading that, the questions of liberation kept coming up in my mind, thinking, you know what? And this is why when we think about our heroes and revolutionaries, why they were so kind of geared to providing political education to people. And even those who were, leaders in themselves, for example, like if you think of Castro, for example, he would spend 6 to 8 hours talking to his people.
Absolutely.
And that kind of education didn't come from a thing of this is like the dictator speaking to people. Because you find the way we are educated in the Western world is very dictatorial. There's no kind of input from the person. There's no kind of molding of the subject matter. There's no kind of creating of reality where we're all involved. It's like, no, this is the way you think. This is the way you should think. And this is the way we've been molded to think. And you see that evidently because, unfortunately, many people, let's speak from the UK context, I'm sure it's the same in other places, but I know for sure in the UK, we know that many people's education stops at school. We have to understand that the curriculum that we have in the UK has been deliberately designed to give people a particular way of thinking. For example, hence why we see all the pushback against any criticism of Churchill, for example. Or when you mention the terms like, ask most people in the UK, they'll tell you that William Wilberforce abolished slavery and he should be celebrated. Or Malcolm X was evil, or Martin Luther King. These are deliberate decisions people make because they want people to think in a certain way. Sorry to go on that tandem, but yeah, carry on.
No, it's absolutely true. And when people have often asked me, so what is this banking model that he speaks about? And I use an example, imagine going into the bank, depositing money, and it's in the account, etc. It's the same kind of education system that we have today. It's this traditional schooling. So your assessment can be a multiple choice. Which of the following is A, B, C, D? It's objective, right? Or even just recently, I had a discussion with a few A-level students and nothing has changed. The majority of like A-levels, be it humanities, be it the sciences, etc. It's a memorization game. It's a typical banking model. It doesn't talk about how we can transform ourselves in a society. It doesn't reflect on underlying structures and how we can learn or unlearn this. It's void, absolutely void of reality. And again, like when we speak about A-levels, and I know it's the same with SATs and many education systems across the globe, right? It's constant memorization. How can I memorize paragraphs and essays to answer a particular question in this way that will get me the A, right? And it's why whenever these transformative revolutions happen, be it in Cuba, be it in Burkina Faso, be it in Vietnam, be it in China, the very first thing they do is, first of all, they make sure they bring up literacy rates to near 100%. The first thing they do is ensure that education makes the children understand what the revolution means, what being a revolutionary is, what a luta continua is, right? And it's that kind of method that is bankrupt from our children today or from students today. Like, absolutely, education does stop at the school and people aren't really willing to engage with it afterwards. But one of the many reasons of that is because education itself is not an engaging paradigm, right? It's just memorize this. This is how things are. These cannot be questioned. Churchill can never be misunderstood. Nazi Germany, Soviet Union didn't do anything.
And I think it's very telling. It's very telling. And I feel like for me, the more you grow up and the more you read, the more you realize just how much propaganda we got fed via the school system. I mean, the UK, going through the British school system, you realize, wow, like people sat down and make deliberate decisions to feed people a certain narrative. That's the only way you can think about it. Because, and again, I would go, not even sound conspiratorial, but this is where I see things as well. And I think Freire alludes to it as well. That it's literally like education has just become another, what's the word? To create people to serve a functioning capitalist mode of production.
100%. It's given us that isolation, that alien model, right? We're turned into these individual characters. We don't believe in the community. We constantly think, oh, what can I study that will make me the most money? Or I don't want to study because I can do an apprenticeship and this will give me the skills to gain more money, etc. And it's never, and in his first chapter, like, Freire details why the pedagogy is necessary, etc. He says it's not a method to reverse the material oppression of one class with the other, which many people want. And that in itself is very reactionary, right? But instead, it seeks to further contribute to the full humanization of all beings. And as a critical theorist, Freire views these like ideological structures shaped by material circumstances of capitalism as the principal obstacle to human development. We can't be our fully humanized selves, be the oppressed or the oppressor when we are living in the material conditions of today, right? And he says, while class analysis is an important component of his ideological approach, he doesn't want to reduce all forms of oppressions to class antagonisms alone, which is really important when we understand race and everything about everything else, right? His approach is to integrate both like objectivism with subjectivism and arguing that neither the world nor people can exist in a mutually exclusive fashion. And he rejects this like false dichotomy of reality, and he does this throughout his book. Like, his ideological freedom is apparent through that analysis as he seeks to, very importantly, transform education from an exercise in ideological domination that we're talking about, and that what we see in our current schools today, to one of liberation, which I think is absolutely beautiful. And it's why I completely stress this reading to everyone, because it's so beautiful. It's so poetic in the way he writes. And mind you, it's like the book is translated from Portuguese to English. And, when we think about the current system that he was writing in, like, he was in the favelas, he was understanding education as a means there. And the fact that it can be applied so wide, but of course the Marxist analysis can always be applied that wide. And it's why I've been loving seeing in the past year you engage with material conditions and class analysis again and again, because I think it's an important component of any
100%
liberatory ideological approach, right?
And I gotta thank you for that, putting me on in many ways. So thank you. But you're absolutely right, and I feel like this process of education as a tools, as a means of locating liberation. I think it's very important. Immediately I'm thinking of Bob Marley, emancipate yourself from mental slavery, number ourselves and free our minds. And I'm immediately thinking of, like, how do we come to create new realities? We think of, cogito ergo sum, I think, therefore I am. If I was to ask you, what do you use language for? Immediately the response to people is, I use language to communicate. I'm like, no, do you think more? Do you communicate more? They're like, no, I think more. So therefore, I think, therefore I am, which means you need a particular type of grammar and language to create a new reality. And I think that's what Freire constantly speaks about, that we have to create a new grammar which is liberatory for all.
Absolutely.
And what other takeaways from this book can you give us, or some gems? Everyone, please read the book. But and I have to be honest, I'm yet to finish it. I'm like a couple chapters left, a couple pages left, but I'm still gonna have and try my best of what I can remember and what I've been through so far. So what else should we take away from this book?
I think also what's really important, because I see this constant like hot take on the timeline, and I love to refer to the timeline because I feel like it's very important in understanding how people think, how people move, etc. And it's constantly this idea of like, white people can't be our allies, they can't be our true comrades, these people who are violent to me, etc., can't work with me, etc. And what's important about Freire, right? He identifies two distinct stages in his pedagogical approach. And I always find it so funny saying the word because I really struggle. But he first says that pedagogical, he first says that oppressed need to unveil the world of oppression in an intellectual sense and use praxis to commit themselves to its transformation. And this first stage is, of course, very necessary, because as long as the oppressed remain unaware of the causes of their conditions, they will fatalistically accept their exploitation, whether that means blaming one another on our oppressions, whether that means the oppressed beginning to adopt traits of the oppressor, because to be an oppressor is to be a man. And, Frantz Fanon, also incredible, he makes the same interjection in Black Skin, White Masks, right? He says, because the fear of freedom in itself leads to the oppressed being like the oppressor, because that the idea of freedom alone, it's a constant effort, right? It's not a gift, it's a conquest, and it's a hard one at that. So to make that transformation alone is very difficult for some to even come to terms to, or it's very difficult for some to be even made aware of, because they're still unaware of the causes of their condition, right? They don't think it's the oppressor. They think it's their not working hard enough, not getting a higher paying enough job, not working from the second they wake up till the second that they sleep, right? And in the second stage, the revealing pedagogy, I suppose, it ceases to belong solely to the oppressed, right? And this is what makes it become a pedagogy of all people in the process of permanent liberation. We cannot liberate ourselves, right, without liberating others. And he emphasizes praxis in doing so. And he maintains that true liberation cannot be a purely intellectual exercise, right? And it must involve action, right? Conversely, at the same time, activism without serious reflection will also be an ineffective means of achieving humanity's full potential. And it's that Sankara quote saying, a soldier without a liberating ideology is also a war criminal. He can easily become a war criminal, right?
Yeah.
Or just, working for an NGO, this and that, without having
our people are free from the shackles of identity politics. But we can sorely.
And working for an NGO or doing charitable stuff without the politics, even mutual aid alone, without the political theory to go hand in hand with it, it's just charity, right? And it doesn't really serve a purpose in our society. It doesn't really do anything. It just aids and abets this constant cycle that we're on. And like a portion of his pedagogy it's with the potential to attract practitioners of all classes, right? In his position, that his process of becoming more fully human cannot be achieved by simply turning the oppressed into new oppressors. That just can't happen. True liberation cannot be given, and it is not a self-achievement. It is instead a mutual process between the oppressed and the oppressor. Whether that means working side by side with white people we might dislike, that is okay. That is the only way it can happen. It has to be a mutual process. And that in itself is a hard interjection to make for many, of course, because, for example, many will find it hard to work with working class whites who so often fill their own role in identity politics, right? They
Yeah.
often vote against their own class interest. So
Yeah.
questions such as that, someone might ask, like, how can someone who has benefited from my degradation and oppression become more humanized? How can I work with them? But again, true liberation cannot be a self achievement, it must be a mutual process. And he talks
Yeah.
about when teachers and students work together in authenticity to expose the constructive reality of domination and to recreate knowledge together, it's this kind of teacher student relationship of powers. It makes power wither away as they each engage into the ontological or historical vocation of becoming more fully human. And it reminds me of that very incredible Kwame Ture quote, right? Because the thing is, I often say to people, someone being a comrade doesn't necessarily mean they have to be your friend. It doesn't even necessarily mean it has to be someone you like, right? And
Yeah.
Kwame Ture has this incredible quote where he says, a white man wanting to lynch me is his problem, right?
Yeah.
But a white man having the power to lynch me, that becomes my problem. So for me, I don't really care if people's personal politics or people's personal views might not match mine or might not be perfect and they might have some problematic
Contradictions.
say-sos. Yeah, and that is their business. I don't give a crap. But when we're
Yeah.
talking about challenging the entire structures as it is, it has to be a mutual process. And this kind of epiphany is very hard for some people to come to. And I think what I love about pedagogy so much is it helped me come to that. It helped me understand that when this process does come about, I have to also humanize much of the oppressors because
Mm.
some of them also didn't understand because, again, this banking model has blinded them also.
You know what? You're spitting facts, and it's quite timely because I tweeted that today. Because I
Mm,
remember, let's just, I mean, full disclosure, let's speak about what's happening right now, this week of the whole Palestine issue and Palestine occupation. And we saw the tweets, we saw the reactionaries, we saw the people who, the anti-blackness, or and people, and I'm not gonna sit here and say it's easy just to say, you know what, I'm gonna rise above it no matter what. It's gonna People are still human beings, so I understand that. But then through dialogue with people and through engaging this text, you realize, you know what, it's not about that. Like we're not reactionaries, we're radical. And radicals has to, the black radical tradition didn't say during the time of slavery that just let's let black people own slaves too. It was now abolish the whole bloody system.
mm-hmm.
When black people didn't turn around and build the black KKK, black people didn't turn around and say we want a Jim Crow that's going to benefit us. It was no, let's abolish it for all. So I kind of feel like what pedagogy is speaking to is using a way of education, but also education being a form of abolition as well. And I feel like it's very important that the TL reveals a lot. And I feel like this is when I come for black capitalists, neck, and all the other people. Like we're not out here trying to replicate the system. We're not
Mm-hmm.
out here trying to like just put the people who are marginalized and put them on top and subjugate everyone else. No, we're not saying that. Yes, if we're talking about, let's say, for example, in State and Revolution, Lenin does speak of like in the initial stage of the proletariat revolution, you are going to oppress some people because you're enforcing the will of the working classes upon the bourgeoisie. But I go, that's not the long term goal. The long term goal is obviously eventually is the diminishing of classes and and doing away with class together and withering away of the state. So I think it's very important that if we're talking about we're being radicals and revolutionaries and wanting to be revolutionaries and wanting to have a vision of liberation, it's not about replicating the system and making it more, POC. And we see what happens. We see it. Like, look what happens with the CIA or the FBI adverts. I suffer from anxiety. I'm a queer. This they're adopting the language of identity politics, and that's what happens.
Buzzwords, absolutely.
I mean, just buzzwords. I kind of caution people, and it's from my own experience and journey that what are you? Are you a reactionary? Are you one of those people who wants to build a world? Again, silly people as well say, I want to build a world where only black people are liberated. I'm like, huh? Well, clearly your analysis is falling short because the same structures of domination that oppress black people in America are identical to what's happening on the streets of Palestine or what's happening in South America. So again, if we want total liberation and freedom from oppressive structures, let's attack those things. So yeah, again, another rant, but I'm quite heated today.
No, I think you're in the right too. Again, and I think I know I've mentioned it to you before, but I'm very aware like it's very easy to put like agents on the timeline to cause these like divisions, and obviously some
Yeah,
people have had very problematic views as well. But even today, we saw someone with a burner account with 7 followers
yeah,
create further divisions, and like the discussion was steered away from the fact that, you know, the material conditions of Palestinians living under occupation right now are being bombed, etc., to I don't want to show solidarity because of these tweets, or I'm
Yes.
not comfortable with this. And people are, of course, they're in their right mind to do that. If that's what they believe, that's what they believe. Solidarity isn't a transactional approach. And I try and explain that very
Exactly.
often to people. But it's very easy to like co-opt these buzzwords of the oppressed and turn them into what people want to see, so it can kind of translate for them to create that further division. And it's this,
Mm-hmm.
again, it's this banking model of education. It always goes back to this banking concept of education being an instrument of oppression. And what I really appreciate about Freire is not only does he critique the banking model, banking concept, and I can go on to the critiques again and again, but he also
Yeah.
suggests the problem posing approach to liberation. Okay, so he says, you know, education, when it's used as a mechanism of the oppression of oppression, it enlists the obviously the banking concept, where teachers speak of reality as if it was this motionless, compartmentalized, and
Mm-hmm.
predictable thing that we see. And the purpose is to constantly just deposit information into students, and it creates this disconnect from students to the structural totality in engendering the oppressed, right? And knowledge is
Mm-hmm.
presented as in disparate and fragmented portions, which kind of obfuscates the ability of students to kind of discern the conditions creating their condition, right? And
Yeah.
this kind of educational distortion that students become then acclimated to their reality, it shows no propensity to challenge the inequitable conditions. And the more
Mm.
students work at storing these deposits, the less likely they're able to develop a critical consciousness and intervene as social transformers. And again, so when we think about the banking model as we see it today, it's,
Mm-hmm.
you know, the classroom is rogue memorization. Pearl Harbor was bombed in 1941. Nazis were bad. Americans were good. Colonization benefited Indians because they had train tracks, etc. And then
Yeah.
you also apply programs such as Prevent, or even the general
Yeah.
militarizations of schools that we see today. And
Yeah.
again, what is Prevent? If you had your if you had a fashion change in the past 6 months, you can be written down as someone that should be suggested for the Prevent program. If you
Yeah.
express some political ideas in school that kind of contradict the banking model, your name can go down. If you suddenly are a bit more acclimated towards religion, your name
Yeah.
can go down. It's these really silly things that, you know, like this idea that students changing in any sense is something to be concerned about, demonstrates
Mm-hmm.
how these individuals put these policies into actions to see education as a means to stabilize and reproduce ideas. But
Mm.
as educators, you should be trying to change students. And how do you do that?
Exactly.
And obviously, he then unveils this fourth dichotomy, and he talks about why the problem posing model is needed. And in this kind of approach, reality is not presented as this closed and limiting order to which one adjusts. It's instead, reality is presented as a problem to be transformed in a mutually collaborative process. And I always want to
Mm.
emphasize the mutually collaborative process, because we are nothing without our teachers and we are nothing without the students. And for authentic
Yes.
liberation, again, this teacher student hierarchy must be transformed into that process where each of us teach and each of us learn from one another. And instructors cannot pragmatically lead students into liberation, right? Instead, they have
Mm-hmm.
to engage again in a collaborative process of unveiling this reality. And it's
Yeah.
that problem posing education that allows critical consciousness to develop and prompts
Yeah.
intervention in the present reality. And unlike the banking model that we have right now, the world no longer remains distorted by information of domination, and instead it becomes an object needing transformative action to further humanization, which I think is really, really incredible about Freire's work, right? And it's this idea that freedom, and it's on in page 29, freedom is acquired
Mm-hmm.
by conquest, not by gift. It must be both pursued constantly and responsibly, right?
Mm. Mm. That was spitting. No, that was spitting. No, I mean, again, I think I'm in total agreement. I think this is why you were so adamant on people reading this, because again, I think when we think about where we locate liberation, I often say, and this is again just kind of in addition to, you mentioned Fanon and people who are inspired by Fanon in our day, is Sylvia Wynter. And I recommend Sylvia Wynter speaks a lot about developing a new grammar, a new understanding of man. And that comes through developing a new language. And like you said, this is exactly what Freire is speaking to. In terms of where we locate liberation, because if we can have a material analysis, if we can talk about which ideology to follow, but again, I always often say that I don't believe liberation will be solely found in the political anyway. Any other takeaways you would take from this book, or things that you like to mention about this book particularly, and then we can talk about some other stuff as well.
Let me think.
If not, we can also talk about the identity politics as well.
I think, okay, I'll just say the significance of Freire's book largely speaks for itself, right? Considering over 1 million copies have been sold worldwide and many more reproduced in the developing world and many more accessed via the internet, etc. Its authentic and humanistic approach to education is a particularly poignant in today's culture of educational standards and high stakes testing, overly militarized schools that we have. We have to work to produce the next generation of educators who understand curriculum as a reflection of power. And from experience, very few educators kind of reflect on why they are teaching a specific subject or lesson, because they're so caught up in being in the compliance with the decision makers, or simply teach how they themselves were taught. And this only serves to reproduce and reinforce compliance with injustice, right? And it's kind of why we at AS for Activism even started, because we wanted to try and authentically commit ourselves to be the people who re-examine ourselves and our society as a whole consistently.
Well, let's speak about AS for Activism then. What is it that you do?
So we are a Birmingham-based book club that read the work of radicalized, marginalized Marxists, right? We also have a California chapter, and we run our mutual aid program that specifically focuses on the migrant and the homeless community within the city of Birmingham and the city of California, which we obviously understand, like, there's such a heavy over-policing of migrants in Cali, right? On top of that, we have cool little services, like we're running regular self-defense classes for women, and we try and, again, like, it's what Freire talks about, is putting the theory and the practice together to hopefully producing a good praxis as best as we can.
Some people might not know, what is mutual aid?
So mutual aid, there's a really great book by, I think his name is Dean Spade, that I'd recommend.
Yeah.
But the best way I can describe mutual aid, like, it doesn't serve to be a charity, right? It serves to obviously do work within the community, but at the same time, I don't particularly like the word, but radicalize or transform the community to understanding our overall means of oppression and why we're here. That's the best way I could describe it. I'm pretty sure many others will be much more equipped in describing that.
Okay. And what is it like? It's seeking to kind of remove reliance of the state in a way?
Absolutely, because in many ways, we obviously, again, like, the state likes to put us in this violent cycle of abuse, right? Being dependent on the state, despite the fact that they're cutting incredibly important programs away from us, or just in general, complete feigning ignorance or ignoring these marginalized communities. So again, when it comes to the migrant community as a whole, people are so over-policed, they can't either get adequate paying jobs, and they end up being in these jobs that exploit them for their labor and forces them to work really, really ridiculous hours for really, really cheap amounts, cash in hand, right? So it serves to not only remove reliance from the government, but kind of reveal what, like, the government's role in this is.
Oh, okay. So are you like radicalizing people by way of helping them as well?
Yeah, that is the goal. And of course, like, a lot of the people that we work with don't have any care to read the text that we're reading or care to be radicalized. And of course, like, material conditions for so many oppressed people, like, not everyone can engage with these works, and that's okay.
Of course.
So we put the information out there, And many have chosen to engage with it, and many haven't chosen to engage with it, but also receive the certain programs that we deliver. And that's okay.
No, 100%. I think you're doing amazing work, and I'm going to put the A's for Activism in the description of this episode because I think you lot should support it, check it out, share, and get involved, and obviously join the book clubs and follow all the pages. This has been a really dope conversation. I really, really enjoyed this. Sham, I'm definitely going to have you on again, and we can talk about, I mean, there's so much more we can talk about. This is very specific about a book in which you love, and thanks for the recommendation. But I'm going to say for future, I think there's so much other topics we could speak about. So until you're listening to The Malcolm Effect with Mamadou, until next time, please like, comment, subscribe, be that on Apple Podcast, Spotify, or on YouTube, and take care.